Hi guys, it's Debbie and welcome to a new episode of What I Watched This Month, in which I definitely didn't go as horror intensive as last month. I've made quite a few standalone videos, reviews, so if there is one relative to the films I'll talk about today, I will leave that link so you can get some more in-depth information. Let's kick off with a series because, as you know, I rarely watch them. At the moment, I find it very hard to commit to lengthy things, especially when it's multiple seasons. That's why I usually enjoy limited series. So I finally decided to watch Moon Knight, mostly because I was curious because it stars Oscar Isaac, but also because although I very rarely watch Marvel content, it seemed like this promised an interesting twist. And the premise is definitely very interesting, with Oscar Isaac as a mild-mannered employee of a gift shop who starts having visions and, without spoilers, experiences different personalities and is unwillingly drawn into a world of Egyptian gods, battles between various creatures, villains. The character design is very cool. Oscar Isaac is trying his best as usual, but the downside to this series are these extremely comical action sequences with bad CGI. The dialogue is very poorly written, with characters basically explaining everything to us. There's this constant over exposition. At one point they could have just brought in a chalkboard to explain what's going on, and then the protagonist's lines were written basically as if they were trying to fit in everything possible to make absolutely clear that he is British. It reminded me of that Kyle Gordon parody song. Next, I'm going to cross off a film I think most of you wanted to hear my opinion on, the Odyssey, the new Christopher Nolan movie. He is a director who has been covered extensively on the channel. I went to an IMAX cinema for the very first time in my life. It was a wonderful experience. I was dragged into this magnificently crafted, realistic world of adventures, monsters, fear, guilt, battles, but while also criticizing some elements. For example, the insane amount of A-lister actors, which drags you out of the magic of the story. I personally don't agree with people saying it's either absolutely perfect, all hail Nolan, or saying he's barely able to direct a film. I think it's a wonderful movie with flaws, but which are outnumbered by the movie's pros. Another movie I absolutely loved this month was Crash, the 1996 Cronenberg version. Now, I had this movie on my watch list for a very long time, and please let me know if some of you also do this, where basically you postpone watching something you know you'll like because then it will be over, the experience will have finished. It's a bit like leaving your favorite part of the dinner for last. Does that make sense? And then of course when I watched it, I loved it. At the moment, I genuinely think it's one of my most favorite films of all time. I know there's some recency bias, but it just ticks off so many boxes of everything that I love. The 90s erotica, the suspenseful narration, unconventional and unlikable characters, and a plot which defies everything we are usually served, as it depicts people who have sexual ties with cars, let's put it like that. In particular, the element of car crashes, the danger, the injuries, the risk. I love everything about this film, the aesthetic, the outfits, the sexual tensions. I just know that at some point I'm going to have to watch Secretary, and I'm putting it off in the same way. To draw some comparisons, this month I also watched 8mm, as it was one of those films that would always pop up in those lists of crime thrillers to watch if you like Zodiac and Prisoners, you know, the kind of lists. So I decided to give it a go, but on the contrary of Crash, within the insanity of the situation, you actually believe the authenticity of the fucked upness of the situations the characters get involved in. In 8mm, everything felt very forced, as if the film was trying its best to show the most extreme stuff possible, but in a performative manner, trying to shock you on purpose. It wasn't awful, but I ended the film thinking, well, that's a bunch of interactions that would never happen in real life, even though the topic is unfortunately very real and very serious. Nicolas Cage portrays a private investigator who infiltrates the world of extreme pornography, and when I'm talking extreme, I mean extreme, in order to solve a case. I mean, in Seven, it took one photograph and one man trembling to have us create in our minds what on earth is being produced in those environments. Whereas here we have Joaquin Phoenix basically doing like a tour guide and explanation of what's available on the market, with Nicolas Cage being like, may I please have one snuff film? And then still tied to Crash, coincidentally, this month I watched another human car relationship movie because I watched Christine, the 1980s Carpenter movie. This wasn't planned. I just realized at the end of the month that I'd watch these two films, but it definitely wasn't my thing like Crash. Christine is the name of a car a young man buys and starts repairing until the car's evil-like aura starts affecting its owner and his loved ones with deadly consequences. Another thrill I watched was Straw Dogs, the 2011 version. I know there is an older one starring Dustin Hoffman, which I assume is better. You let me know. In the movie, a woman moves back into a small town with her husband and meets all the old acquaintances she had back then. Let's say a lot of good-for-nothing people, including her ex-boyfriend, who starts to become a bit too close to her. Let's just say, without spoilers, that there is very heavy tension in the air, and all of this explodes in the second half of the film. If you like light-hearted movies, this is not the one. You feel uncomfortable throughout most of it. I think Alexander Skarsgård was born to portray sexy men, but on the extreme sides of whatever end of the spectrum of good and evil you put him. But at many points of the movie, the dialogue was very poor and the storytelling got lost. I'll have to watch the original and draw some comparisons. I then watched the new Evil Dead movie, Evil Dead Burns. I enjoyed it, but I guess there isn't too much to say about it, as it is exactly what you expect, and it isn't too groundbreaking compared to the other Evil Dead movies I'd seen. They're all very similar, with some small elements changing. The protagonist usually in isolated locations awaken violent spirits that make them fight with their loved ones in the most brutal, gruesome manners possible. And this movie is exactly that. One thing I did praise about this film was how creative the camera gets, but at the same time, one very negative aspect of it is how very large portions of the film are very dark and grey. I then finally watched Rental Family, as it was back in cinemas as a special like summer event at an open air cinema. I didn't go to watch it when it was first released because I'd got the completely wrong impression of it, as I think most people did. It was marketed as a nearly silly comedic role, with the advertising showing more of the funny side of Brendan Fraser's character, an actor in Japan hired to work as a rental person. He'll pose as a husband, friend, father, whatever is necessary. In reality, the movie does have a lot of comedic relief, but it also digs deep into the topic of extreme loneliness, reaching the point of having to pay somebody when you're stuck in unpleasant situations, the pressure of society, and the dual nature of helping people while also lying and feeding into this problem at the core. So I'm happy I decided to give it a go in the end. Another movie I'm happy I watched was Deep Cover, a very silly, light-hearted movie my dad wanted me to watch, as he had seen it in Italian and wanted to rewatch in English to hear the different accents. So we watched it together, and it's no Oscar winner, but we were generally laughing all the way through, as it's hard nowadays to find something that is actually entertaining without stupidity and that actually has good, funny jokes. In this movie, three very unlikely people meet at an improv class and end up working undercover for the police using their improvisation skills. I also hadn't seen Orlando Bloom in quite a while, and he was just so funny. Also, considering he was playing a role within a role. I then watched La Casa delle Finestre che Ridono, a 70s Italian horror film translated to The House with Laughing Windows. In this movie, a man is called to a small town to restore an old painting, but once he arrives, odd events start to make him question whether there isn't something darker going on. The movie is genuinely terrifying, and we actually went on a bit of a failed day trip searching for the filming locations for the movie, so you can check that out if you're interested. I then watched My Favorite Cake, a movie which I'd heard a lot about when it was first released. There was a lot of publicity about it, but after that it received quite mixed reviews, and I can see why. It's a touching story of an elderly woman left alone with friends who barely visit her and with whom she mostly chats about complaints, about illnesses, husbands who don't understand them, and so on, all against the backdrop of a country with very strict rules and regulations, until one day she meets a man and opens up to him. I won't spoil anything. Now, let's put it like this. Obviously, a story is very touching. It made me think of older people close to me, or even my own future, but at the same time, as many have pointed out, the plot sort of sets up a lot without choosing to commit to one thing. I'm not saying it's a bad movie, I just expected something more concrete. It's hard to say much without spoiling. Let me know if you've seen this film. Another very different movie, but with similar reviews, is A New Dawn, a stunning Japanese animated film. The director actually worked on Your Name, which is known for its absolutely breathtaking visuals, but this new movie doesn't really take that big leap beyond the visuals. Somebody compared it to us being shown one random episode within a series with us struggling to empathize with these characters we've just met. Now, I wouldn't reach the point of agreeing with that and saying that this movie was absolutely impossible to understand. It just took me a very long time to actually get in sync with these characters, when in reality the premise is very simple. A childhood home is about to be demolished, and the son of the owner and his friends who grew up in the house and who also hold it dear in their hearts come up with a plan to try and stop the demolition. So I love the images, and the theme of the loss of childhood is very dear to me, but again, the storytelling could have been improved. But if we actually want to talk about really hideous animated movies, I watched the new Animal Farm film. Now, setting apart the foundational discussion about whether everything can be transformed into a light-hearted child's film, this movie is an absolute abomination compared to the source material. The original is considered foundational reading in literature and poses an interesting discussion surrounding the risks of extreme solutions to society. In this case, it started as a criticism of communism, but if I'm not mistaken, Orwell said it could actually be applied to any situation in which personal greed takes over the collective good. There is also a deeper historical meaning with the CIA buying the rights to the book, but that's another story. With this new film, scrap all that. We have Seth Rogen as a twerking pig, we have Cybertrucks, shopping centres, Candy Crush, fart and burp jokes. Kids aren't stupid. You know, you can actually get them to think without all of that. I then watched Quarantine, which wasn't as bad as I was expecting, although I've been informed that it is basically a remake of Wreck, and I haven't seen any of the Wreck movies, so I'm going in without a comparison. If you're okay with 90 minutes of shaky cam, screaming, people jumping out from every side, jump scares, this is for you, as it's basically a camera crew trapped inside an apartment building with something taking over its residents, and they keep filming everything while they fight to stay alive. Very convenient, because I would have bolted out of the door after the first thing that they film. Then I watched The Return of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and I have a bit of a hot take on it. This is basically considered one of the worst films within the franchise, and it definitely has some borderline ridiculous scenes. In particular, Leatherface feels more like some middle school theatre club student's outfit for the end of year shows. The characters spend more time discussing things between themselves than actually doing anything. Renée Zellweger looks more confused than scared throughout the whole film. I think this is actually her first lead role ever, but at the same time, I have to admit that I felt entertained by Matthew McConaughey's absolutely insane over-the-top acting, which was over-sexualized for no reason. In many sequences, you even forget that it's a Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They even put this all right in it. It's just so deranged, weird, bizarre, like something you would watch with your friends for a laugh. The director even said he wrote the cast as cartoonish on purpose. I just can't hate on it too much. I would rather hate on a massive budget production. I then watched I Love Boosters, another very chaotic film, but in a completely different way. It's one of the most colourful films I've seen recently. It's a big middle finger to all those dark grey films that are being released today. It follows a group of friends who steal from the clothing shops of a famous designer and do it in very creative ways, coming up with fun plots and extravagant outfits. So it has all these eye-pleasing aesthetics, the comedic side, but as the plot progresses, we realise the anti-capitalist criticism becomes more and more prominent. This is something the director isn't new to, as he already directed Sorry to Bother You. Another crazy movie I watched was Slaughterhouse Rulez, which is basically St. Trinian's, but built on top of a giant fracking site that releases something horrible. I thought this movie was going to be way worse than it actually was. It did genuinely get some laughs out of me, and I don't think I've ever hated a Simon Pegg performance. That being said, the production design is a bit weird at points. The story tries to pack in a few more jokes than needed, and often the tension isn't really felt as much as it should have been. Another film I thought would have been way worse is The Final Girls, in which a group of friends get stuck within a horror film and they have to try to escape the killer that inhabits it. I won't get into the meta movie physics of how that's possible. The characters themselves make fun of the fact of being in a movie within a movie. The film is basically a parody of the horror film within the horror film, and every single horror trope that could happen happens. The horny people, the bad choices, the flashbacks, the hard to kill killer. everything. If you like the season of American Horror Story set inside the summer camp American Horror Story 1984, then you'll like this. But last, and maybe even least, is Patient Zero, in which a bunch of very famous actors portray a team of scientists closed within a military base, while outside there is a violent global pandemic. They are trying to find the title Patient Zero in order to find a cure to this pandemic. I can only summarize the film with a lot of parkour, a lot of contact lenses, and a lot of people shouting at each other and not getting much done while explaining things to us. I mean, personally, I wouldn't recommend it. We're absolutely loaded with films on this topic, so there are a bunch of better options out there. But with that, we have reached the end of today's list, and I would now love to hear what you've been watching, what you loved, what you hated, what you think about the titles I mentioned today. Let me know everything with a comment down below. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.